session, in which we had a long discussion about how to value public goods. Now, if you subsidize farming, and many people think we should go on subsidizing farming, you've got to be certain what you are subsidizing. If you're subsidizing production, you may be doing yourselves a great deal of harm. If you're subsidizing valuation of the environment, the diversity of the crops you grow, the diversity of the forests that you may plant, you're in a very different situation. And so valuing public goods, and also I add valuing public bads, is something that does not so far be nearly far enough explored. And so my answer to your question is growth by itself is certainly not enough. We need to value public goods, we need to value public bads. We have to see, in fact, how it is that we could aim for a balanced society and not necessarily a richer society in the crude sense of the term. If I could just look to you and say, you must tell me when to switch off.
One more question, and then we'll refer to other questions.
Well, let's have somebody from the back, yeah.
Are there any non-energy related technologies excuse me, that you're aware of, and I'm thinking of things like nanotechnology or geoengineering projects that could help us mitigate against the effects of climate change?
Well, you mentioned two. In the case of nanotechnology, I think probably there are possibilities, but they're so far not very well developed. As I say, it's the law of unintended consequences that worries one in both those cases. In the case of nanotechnology, if you had Martin Rees, the current president of the Royal Society, standing here, I'm sure he would tell you that there are many very promising nanotechnologies which are now under examination. The problem is that we don't know all their consequences, and we have to work it out very carefully, and some of them, of course, could be catastrophic consequences, so we have to be very careful. In the case of geoengineering, well, again, that raises immensely difficult issues. Can any one country start doing some geoengineering which could affect other countries? I was on an international task force looking at hits from space, the meteors that hit us all the time in larger or smaller degree. And supposing that NASA, which has the necessary technology, saw a meteor or an asteroid coming in which would have hit, let us say, New York, and they had the technology to divert it, and they did divert it, and instead it hit, let us say, Mali, as a very poor country, who pays? Anything that deals with geoengineering requires a really robust international a really global system in which anyone who ventured into the fields of geoengineering would have to get international agreement to do so, and it would be about as difficult, in fact it would be more difficult even, than the problems which caused such difficulties in Copenhagen. There are geoengineering possibilities. I'm sure you've heard about them, like putting iron particles in the surface of the sea to absorb carbon dioxide. When they did that, they found that all it did was to take up it was fine so long as you kept on distributing the particles, but the moment you stopped distributing the particles, it just went back to what it was before. So it's worth looking at geoengineering. The Royal Society has published a very interesting paper on the subject. It's going to have another conference on the subject. I went to one of them not recently. But I think it's a very dodgy business, and it has this very, very substantial implication of global arrangements which must be globally arrived at. And that means bringing in the question of climate justice and justice between states, and that I can assure you is immensely complicated and very, very difficult just to embark on from one moment to another. I think that's probably all I've got time for. Anyway, thank you all for listening.
Sir Crispin, thank you very much for a totally fascinating introduction to our day, and I'm sure it set us on a real base for considering many of the problems that concern us. And on behalf of us all here, thank you very much indeed for that.